Hi, I'm Mike Henry, and let's talk about layer management in both Procreate and Photoshop. We're going to take this older Procreate piece and this even older Photoshop piece, and we're going to take a look at the main differences between the way I handle layers in Procreate and how I handle them in Photoshop, and a little bit of historically how I've done it and how I do it now. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a while, this is probably something that looks very familiar to you. This is how I do my usual Procreate stack in recent times. So we've got a layer that is flats, a layer that is lighting. Nothing really has any names unless there's something that's really critical for me to name. Otherwise, renaming things is kind of a hassle in Procreate, so I just don't do it. Here I have the file in Photoshop. Now, I am using a mouse, not a tablet, so we're not really going to do anything too complicated, but I kind of wanted to talk about the differences between the two, as well as like a couple of little tricks here. So first, you can see our layers are very different over here. We have them in folders. The folders are named, and then if we were to actually expand for instance, the flats folder, you can see here that I have every layer named. Now this is for two reasons. One is for my own clarity when I'm working on this. So here's hair. And if we were to turn that on and off, you see the hair turns on and off. It's for my own clarity. And then it's also for if you ever need to pass a file, having everything named is super important. Now, most people who are just working on their own artwork, they will never need to pass a file. However, if you are working in a studio or you are collaborating with other freelancers, something like that, you are going to want everything named so that when they open this folder, or excuse me, when they open this file up, they will see all of these folders and it'll be super clear as to what they need to do. So we've got the background layers, we have the flats, and then we have the lighting layers, which as I toggle that on and off, you can see all of the lighting basically turns on and off. And then within lighting, we have all of these individual layers. We've got the AO, we've got the shadows, we've got the cast shadow, we've got all the stuff that we normally do when I'm breaking down a Procreate file, because a lot of my flow in Procreate is straight transferred from how I work in Photoshop. The only difference is I use a lot more layers usually when I'm in Photoshop. Something I want to talk about though, because this is something that's been asked of me, is how I might do something differently if I'm in Photoshop. I think one of the biggest things that I would do differently would be how I structure the creation of the shadow layer. So as you see here, we have, let's actually turn all of this off except for the AO. Okay, so we've got the ambient occlusion right there. And you know that when we're working in the ambient occlusion, we're all staying on one layer. It's set to multiply. In the case of this piece, you can see that the opacity has also been slightly reduced. Let's turn that up to 100% just for the sake of having it on. Now, something that would be very different that I would do in Photoshop would be if we've got, actually, let's turn on the cast shadow just so I can sample this color here. Okay. So one thing that I would do, actually, you know what? Sorry to change it on you. The cast shadow is going to be clearer for me to work with. So let's just duplicate that so that we can see what that looks like. So something that I would do that would be really different is when I'm working on one layer at a time, of course, we have that problem where if we make some sort of a catastrophic mistake, we can't get that back, right? So if I'm here and I'm painting, let's get something that's just a hard brush just so that we can see it very, very clearly. So we've got this brush, right? And all we're doing is showing that when we add to this, it adds to that shadow layer. The thing is though, now if we want to, let's say, erase away here, right? We erase both of them. The cool thing that you can do in Photoshop that you cannot do in Procreate is you can make a folder a multiply layer. Excuse me, you can make a folder a blend mode in general. So let's take this cast layer that we have here and just turn it back to normal for a second and create a folder and put the cast in that folder and then set the folder from pass through to multiply. So now everything that goes into this folder will be multiply, which means you can now create a new layer in this folder, that's what we've got right here. Let's just name this new guy. It is set to a normal layer, but because it exists in this folder, it is multiply. And now if we are over here and we paint, make this a little bigger. What is happening? Oh, I'm on eraser. Right. If we paint, it gets added to that layer. Since we're using the same color and those layers are set to be normal within this folder, it basically treats this entire folder as one multiply layer, which means what if you went in here and you painted these lines and you're like, oh shit, actually those all kind of needed to be moved or something like that. You can just grab that layer and you can move them and it does not disrupt your core multiply that you're trying to do. So that means in my opinion, where this becomes the most important is what if, for instance, you have a gradient like this. And a gradient, of course, our human brains can really pick up on when there's like a disruption in this gradient, right? We see that dot like pretty clearly. So what you can do now is you can say like, I'm gonna just completely wing it here since I'm on a mouse, but let's say you're like, oh, I want that arm to get more of a shadow that goes up here like that, let's just say. And then you're like, oh, but I want it to fade off. So let's get our eraser and we can fade it off. And what we're doing is, let's just say this is what you were going for. You have your gradient and your line working in harmony together without disrupting one or the other. This comes in handy mostly when you're trying to do something that has less imperfections or less human hand in it. So for instance, the same thing would happen if you were, let's say you were using only soft brush like this. Let's go to like the face, and you're, again, this is a very tricky thing on a mouse right now, but let's just say you're going like this, and you get this shadow right here, let's just say, and then you say, oh, let's erase away. I would do this with selections, but for now, let's just say we erase away to establish where that jawline is. And then what if you say like, oh, but I need this to go up just like a little bit more, but I don't want to disrupt this curve. You can literally just make a new layer and then come in here and you could say like, okay, that'll go up. And then you could be like, ooh, no, that doesn't look very good. Let's erase it. Let's soften it a little bit. And while you're softening it, you're not impacting the other layer that you had. So this is an awesome thing you can do in Photoshop that you cannot do in Procreate. I hope that at some point you can. But what I wanted to highlight for people here is that when you see me do my paint methods in Procreate and I'm keeping everything on these like singular layers, that's because of the layer limit. If I don't have that layer limit, I would do something like this in a heartbeat where you could just turn on all of these things and you have them all layering and you can do whatever you want with them and they're non-destructive, which is just super nice. Okay, another thing I really want to show real quick is a more involved Photoshop file. Now, there are things about this, because this is kind of an older piece now, there are things about this that I would change. We will not talk about that right now. I'll save that maybe for like a self-critical episode or something. But the thing is, this is a PSD that I just had around that has a lot of layers, so I wanted to talk about that. You can see down here, 229 layers, 32 groups. This is also far from the biggest Photoshop file I have, but again, it's one that I had, so I wanted to highlight it. We open it up here, we've got just this folder called all. This is a common thing that I do, so if the next person who comes in who has to work on it just wants to grab this file and move it somewhere, they can. You can also see how heavy this particular file is, which I wouldn't want it to be normally this heavy, but it's a good candidate for showing it off. Let's go to the BG. For now, just to make things clear, I'm gonna turn off all of the sort of dressing of the background and just go with that. Now here we've got a new head layer. This is some legacy stuff from when I was testing out various head sizes, so we won't even bother looking at that right now. You can see on top here, I have a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. So let's just zoom in a touch and see what that looks like with it off. Boop. You can see everything's more desaturated and less contrast. That's usually a bump that I will do towards the end. It's a pretty small bump. Let's see what it's set to. Yeah, it's 10. I always turn on use legacy, and then I just, for this one, set it to 10. It's usually around 10 that gets me what I'm looking for. So then let's not turn on any of this stuff and just go into the paints. All right, so we've got the paints folder, as I pointed out in the last piece that was a Procreate file brought into Photoshop. This is a full from scratch Photoshop file, so you can see how I name things. In the paints category, we've got the shoulder, turn that off. We've got the head, turn that off. The body, and then the axe in the background. Now you might say, oh, that's crazy. You've got those 4 folders. They must have a lot of layers in them. They actually have a lot of folders in them. Folders upon folders upon folders. Within this head folder, we have these bindings, which are layers. This is normally how I number my layers. So which ones are the bindings? Let's see, they're those. That's not good enough. Let's do, actually, let's turn off head and do shoulder. So within shoulder, we've got green string, we've got the iron pieces, we've got the front horn, we've got the light leather, and we've got the dark leather. Let's turn on the iron and look at iron. So open up iron. This one's pretty simple. That's good. It's good to see. We've got ref. What is my ref? I must have had, oh, reflection. I thought maybe it was a reference layer or something. So you can see it is actually quite subtle. It's just because it's turning off really slow. That's why I didn't notice it. So there it is with the reflections on and the reflections off. Then we've got this layer here, which is the shine that's placed on it. And then we have the shadow layer. Something that you may notice about this is these are not multiply shadow layers and these are not lighting layers. These are color picked. Actually, a majority of the way I've painted in my career is just by color picking and painting the color that I've picked. It's not been through the methods that you see me do a lot on the channel over the last, let's say, year or so. Because what I do on the channel, since it's for Procreate, is about optimizing for Procreate. Let's turn this back on and do something like let's turn the green string back on, but look at the front horn. Front horn has more going on, you can see, as far as layers are concerned. And this is normally how I number things. What I do is I create, in the old days, again, not doing the methods that we normally talk about on the channel, I create this core flat, and then I paint, actually I usually don't necessarily paint exactly to high like that. I usually do that. I'll usually paint in the shadow, then paint in the high. So I must have done some different order here, but anyways, and then even darker to bring it down more. Then we've got these markings that are just painted with some random brush that I have. This one is set to a multiply layer, so this is actually it's that color set to multiply and with its opacity lowered. And then that layer has been duplicated and blurred, which is what you can see right there if I turn it on and off. Then I have a bounce layer right there, which is bouncing like the hair. Then we have these little nicks and scratches. They're numbered as 1, 2, 3. That's not how these were laid in though. The way they were laid in was 1 was the first one, or excuse me, 2 was the first one laid in. So the actual scratches were laid in, then shadows applied within those like divots or little cracks or whatever, and then a shine was applied there. So what I'm trying to highlight here is not only the methods, that this is all done with color picking, but that it's also the structure of these files are very, very different. If I go like this, if I hold Option, you can see everything. So everything that goes into the shoulder are all of these layers. If I were doing this in Procreate, I probably would take a completely different angle to doing this. And on top of that, there'd be a lot of merging going on. For instance, a layer like this, that's KB, that stands for knockback. That's on that back horn just to knock it back by bringing some of the atmosphere onto it. Things like that, I would have to find new solutions for. an alternate way that I could have done that would have been to see, does this have the string on it too? No, the string is part of the top layer. What I was going to say is I could also just turn off the knockback. I could flatten, I could merge this group, and then I could lower its opacity to pick up the background. But again, there's other issues happening there that we're dealing with at the same time. So let's go ahead and collapse all this back again. The only thing that I think is kind of interesting is the face has some of what I do in Procreate. If we open up the head and we go to the skin, there's a lot going on here. I'm just going to turn it all off. For this one, I put down a flat, and then I put down a lighter color. Here's the blush. Here's the 5 o'clock shadow. Here's the darkening around the eyes. And then here's the actual like makeup sort of that's around his eyes. Here's the drop shadow for the paint, and then here's the paint that's on his forehead. And now we get into the shadow, which is a multiply layer that is that color. You can barely even see it. It's like the same exact color as his skin almost, but it's set to multiply. So in this case, I did the method that you guys see me do a lot here on the channel. All of these layers represent all the local color stuff, and then it's shadow, and then second shadow, and then a rim light support shadow, the shine for his skin, and then the rim light for his skin. So, as I said a second ago, what I'm trying to highlight here is the difference in structure and the difference in methodology. And the point is the stuff that I talk about on my channel, the reason why I try not to show everyone like, this is how you do this, and it's very prescriptive, is my hope is that if you watch a lot of the videos and you digest a lot of the methodologies, they become tools, and then you use them when you've determined it's the right time to use them. I know that takes a lot of experience and a lot of doing and then figuring out what works. But that is the ultimate goal, is that you actually become an artistic problem solver, and the more tools that you have, the more problems you're able to solve. Things like drawing anatomy and drawing in perspective and all that kind of stuff, those are also tools. All of these things add up to different tools that allows you to tackle all the problems. And that's what art is. It's basically problem solving. Okay, so now at the end, just to sort of get this back to where it was, we turn on that brightness contrast adjustment there and turn the background layers back on, and we get what was ultimately that final piece there. So these two pieces are both very different. One is more simple and the other one is more complex, but I hope this gave a little bit of a window into how I might organize my files and some little tricks that are different behaviorally as to how I would handle it in Procreate than in Photoshop. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.